So you're finishing up your last master's degree and want to pursue a PhD and eventually teach on the Hebrew Bible. Do you choose a PhD in Old Testament, or do you choose to study in a closely related field also called a cognate field, such as Assyriology? Today, we discuss that question on this episode of Ancient Egypt and the Bible. So you want to teach the Bible when you grow up. Today, we are going to discuss the question of whether to pursue a PhD in the Old Testament or a cognate field. Now, when making this decision, you are faced with a difficult choice. Unlike those who study in the New Testament, where if you want to teach or do research in the New Testament, you have few options other than to do a PhD in the New Testament, where you focus on the minutiae of Koine Greek. With the Old Testament, there is so much data and so many specialties within the field that it is going to largely depend upon several factors, many of which may not be even under your own control. On the topic of subject matter alone, if you do a PhD in Old Testament, much of what you will be focusing on is secondary literature. In other words, much of your focus of your studies will be historical theology, or in other words, what the theological and biblical studies scholars of the past and present have to say about the passages you are focused upon. On the other hand, if you do your research in a cognate field, your focus might be in Assyriology, Egyptology, geography, archaeology, or West Semitic texts, and how they compare to what is found in the Bible. And as such, you will be working a lot more with primary sources, such as ancient texts, than, say, the opinions of other scholars or secondary sources. Another consideration is, where do you want to work after you finish your education? Let's say you want to teach the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament at a seminary or institution of higher learning. The hiring patterns for this role swings between favoring cognate and Old Testament specialties. In the 1980s, most people who were hired to teach the Hebrew Bible held cognate specialties. Today, that pendulum has swung in the other direction to the extent that schools are now hiring primarily those with strictly Old Testament specializations. Much of this, too, depends upon how well seminaries are doing. When the economy is good and donations are healthy and student enrollment is high, schools tend to hire more people in the cognate disciplines. When times are bad, schools become more risk-adverse, preferring to only hire those who have an Old Testament specialization. Also, something to consider is that when times are good, Hebrew Bible departments that primarily hire graduates in the cognate fields are generally well-funded and profitable for the institution, often receiving large grants and trusts. Why? Because they generate discoveries that are of interest to the general public. However, when fortunes turn against the institution, these departments also become the first to be cut, and their funds cannibalized to sustain the, quote, core mission, end quote, of the institution, even though that department itself remained financially healthy and growing. I'm looking at you, Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. The hard truth is that when Bible colleges face hard times, administrations tend to blame their successful risk-taking strategies and double down on their failing traditional curricula. when the fact is that their failures had more to do with myopia, insularity, and poor planning than anything else. However, under these ineptitudes, those who practice cognate disciplines always get the axe. Unless it is counseling, aka practical theology, they always find a way to make themselves parasitically needed. Now, if your interest is primarily research, then you can go either way, Old Testament or a cognate field. Nevertheless, there is a paradox here. There is probably more opportunity to make significant discoveries in a cognate field because of the immense wealth of data available, and moreover, that data has not been completely picked over. But there are potentially less opportunities to teach students if you choose a cognate field. However, if you end up not being able to get work in an institution of higher learning, which happens to most PhDs, you'd be better served holding a degree in a cognate field, as having a PhD in Old Testament can frighten off secular employers. So anyway, that covers the question of, do I pick a PhD in Old Testament versus a cognate field? We hope you found this subject interesting. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.